Welcome to another edition of the Radio Coffee House Show, where Jesus meets coffee meets talk radio. And the next one starts right now. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Clint Armitage with the Radio Coffee House. Thanks for coming back and thanks for listening in. Okay, today's show is something weird. I was going to say funky, but it's actually weird. It just shows how God can use anything, anyone, anywhere, any place to move people, to show them how powerful He is, to get them to understand His glory and that He is all things good. Man, the show is awesome. So we got an audio clip here of ChatGPT again. Remember last time we had the AI prophecy, the 666 prophecy thing happening with AI starting to confirm some biblical things? Well, in this video, there's an atheist, a staunch atheist, that actually gets led to Christ through ChatGPT. He lays out logical arguments with ChatGPT, and then Chat counters his arguments. After Chat counters the arguments, this atheist gives his life to Christ. What? All right, let's listen to the audio clip.
The past 11 years, I was a staunch atheist, and recently I had this experience that completely changed my worldview. I came to the conclusion that God was real, and His Son, Jesus Christ, came to earth, was crucified, and was resurrected. So I grew up in the church. My dad is a minister, and he started preaching when I was about 9 years old. Before then, we went to church 3 times a week at this tiny little Nazarene church in Elk City, Kansas. So shout out to the Martas if you're watching. The world that I grew up in was one where you just kind of mentally kept track of who was and wasn't a Christian, who was a Catholic, who was a Baptist, who was a Lutheran, who was a Calvinist, so on and so forth. It was deeply ingrained in everyday life. To me, there wasn't really anything special about my faith, because it was just so normal. And I think because of this, it developed this fascination with people who didn't believe in the same things that I did. I spent 25 years in a faith that I just saw as this monotonous routine. And because of that, I got to a point where I had to really ask myself, do I actually believe in any of this? And I could not get myself to say yes. So at that point, I was an atheist, and over the next few years, I dove headfirst into atheist podcasts and books and movies and YouTube channels, you name it. So during that time, I turned into this really angry, militantly atheist person, and it cost me friendships. It drove a wedge between myself and my family. I used to try to come up with the most offensive anti-Christian things I could think of and post those online because I was trying to pick fights with people. I wasn't just into arguing against religion. I was good at it. So after 4 or 5 years, I finally calmed down. I stopped picking fights with everybody. I knew all the arguments and knew all the counterpoints. That question, that debate in my mind, it was settled. Fast forward to early June 2025, this year. I'm working third shift. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I get in this conversation with ChatGPT, and I'm arguing, because that's what I do, in favor of moral relativism, and ChatGPT is pushing back and arguing in favor of moral objectivity. And basically, my argument is basically there's no such thing as real morals. ChatGPT is actually there is. Anyway. I said, if you want to prove to me that moral objectivism is true, you first have to prove that God exists. And ChatGPT was basically all right, buddy, let's go. And it presented these 3 arguments, which changed everything for me. The first one was the argument for contingency. The second one was the argument for fine-tuning. And the third one was for the historical evidence for Jesus Christ, His death, His resurrection. Now, here's the thing. I've heard these arguments a million times. And maybe it's the mood I was in. Maybe it's the fact that it was 2 a.m. I'm 36 now. Maybe it's the fact that I'm looking at these arguments through a completely different set of eyes than I had whenever I abandoned my faith. Who knows? Regardless, I couldn't come up with an honest counter argument. especially not when you look at those three arguments together. So it presented those arguments, and I remember responding, I said, that's a very compelling argument. And it was at that point that I experienced this crazy, intense wave of emotion, like nothing I had ever felt before. And it was like there was some kind of presence, and I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I know that what I felt was not normal. I was afraid. I was scared, and it's because I went from living in a universe that was completely materialistic and completely naturalistic to all of a sudden I exist in a universe that was created. It was like when Dorothy steps out of her house into the land of Oz. And I think that the reason that I felt fear is because it was basically confirmed to me that there is a being that exists that is infinitely powerful and infinitely knowledgeable that you could never ever hope to control or escape. It's almost like the feeling that you get when you read good cosmic horror. It's coming face to face with something that is hopelessly beyond all comprehension. After my shift, I got in my car, and for the first time in about 17 years, I prayed. And I talked to God, and I unloaded. I told him about the struggles I had had with depression. I had begged him for a sign whenever I was a kid, just anything to show me that he was there, and I only ever received silence. But it was that moment that he broke his silence. For the first time in my life, I heard God speak. And he said 6 words that hit me like a freight train, and they've echoed in my mind ever since. He said, "That wouldn't have been good enough." I was mid-sentence when I heard those words, and I have like tears rolling down my face, okay? It was like my mouth stopped working, and I couldn't keep talking. I just stopped right there, and it's because he shut me up so I would finally do what I couldn't be bothered to do in the first place, and that was to shut up and listen. And here's the thing, he's absolutely right. If he had made some grand gesture, sent a letter down from the clouds saying, "Hey, my guy, I'm here, I'm real," it wouldn't have been good enough. If I had been given a sign like that, it would have just fit right into the Christian mundanity that I had grown up with. It would have been faith by force, not by choice. There's so much context that I don't have time to put into this video. But I realized that even little moments from decades ago in my life had played a role in this exact moment. And because of that, like, it was all too perfect. It was all too well written. So it had to be divine. So on the morning of June 2nd, right after I pulled into my driveway after work, I prayed and I gave my heart to Christ. Truly, I believe, for the first time.
Okay, so cool, right? Man, God is so good. God is so amazing that he would use artificial intelligence, technology, to speak to an atheist, a staunch atheist, a guy that is 100% against God, and gets him to realize, oh, God is real. And then God even adds on to that a supernatural effect to him. Like he said, he got this overwhelming feeling, or he felt God's presence, is how he put it. He said he didn't know exactly how to explain it, but that's what he said, that he felt God's presence. Then he also said that he had this fear, the fear of God. Well, that's exactly what Proverbs says. Let's see what Proverbs says. Let's read that verse. Okay, Proverbs 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Right there. He understood. He gained God's wisdom. He gained knowledge. Why? Because he understood, the fear of God. And he had this reverence, this fear that he knew, okay, if there's a God, then he is a powerful being that created everything. There's times when, as humans, when we're going about our day and we're not really thinking about anything other than ourselves, we're kind of in that selfish mode. You know how Every once in a while we'll get like that. Some people live like that. This guy said that's what he did for a while. But we get like that sometimes, and then we see things or we experience things, and then it brings us back to reality again so that we understand, wait a minute, I am not as good as I think. I am not as great or as powerful as I think. Because it's pretty easy to humble yourself. You don't want God to humble you, right? Like, that's one thing you never say. Like, God humble me. No, do not say that. Because that's like something that's scary to say, God humble me. No, we don't want to do that. We want to humble ourselves. Like this guy did. The way he was speaking, he humbled himself before God. But if you want to ever humble yourself before God so that you don't go on that pride ride too long and start thinking you're anything big, all you have to do is go to the ocean. Go out deep enough and take a look around. And if you still think that you're this all-powerful person, jump in the water. This is what helped me to realize how powerful God is and how not powerful I am. There's a couple things that happened to me. When I was younger, and I used to live in Hawaii, I used to do shore break type body surfing. I'd go to these beaches, and these beaches would have these like pretty strong shore break, and sometimes they get like 12 feet high, huge shore break, and I'd body surf it, right? And then that experience would put me in my place. Not that I was looking for that, but I was just doing some body surfing, and the shore break would slam me into the ground. Because if you know anything about shore break, when the wave sucks back out from the beach and then it builds up and slams you straight down into the sand because it sucks all the water from the beach portion. You know how if you're surfing, regular couple foot waves or something, pretty decent swells, you're out there a little bit and you have water beneath you. Well, shore break, when you're body surfing shore break, it sucks all the water from underneath. And when the wave hits, it slams you down straight to the sand. It's pretty gnarly. So anyways, when you're in something like that, you find out real quick that you're not as powerful a swimmer as you think you are. Or if you've ever been in a huge storm. So I was in Texas, and I was in this field. It was one of the road trips for the road show, and this huge storm happened. And man, there was thunder and lightning, and it was rumbling, and there was crazy wind and crazy rain. And I was out there camping, and I was like, this is crazy. This is a little bit scary here. And I prayed to God, and I said, Lord, I know you're in control. But what I realized right then was how puny I am and how big God is. And so realizing the power of God really gets you to put yourself in a position where you understand God is in control. It's not me. God is in control. And so when we hear this guy's testimony, where he goes from an atheist that used to argue with everybody, that used to pick fights with everybody, and then he matured a little bit, but he still had this attitude, and he said he was angry and all that stuff, to now you hear his testimony, and you hear in his voice this peace, this understanding, this harmony. And you also hear the humbleness in his voice. And he talks about how he used to be, and even the words he's using, when you listen to him, you're like, yeah, I think this guy's humbled himself. And he says why? Because he feared. Once he realized God is real, he feared. Oh, and the other thing that he mentioned that I wanted to bring up too was how he said all these little things played a part. And he said it was divine, right? Yeah, it was totally divine. What he was piecing together, and he didn't say these exact words, but what he's piecing together is God's design for his life. This is God putting markers all through his life so that he can look back on it when things get revealed, like it got revealed to him that day when he gave his life to Christ. And he can look back and go, oh, wait a minute, God was there. God was there, and God was there. Just like your life, just like my life. We have markers in our life when we can look back and go, that was definitely God. God was there. God was with me. God was carrying me, like that Footprints poem. God was carrying me through the struggle. God was with me when I needed him. God saved me when I couldn't save myself. Remember, I gave my testimony before about when I almost drowned, and it was an angel saved me. Yeah, God was there. That was a marker in my life. God saved me plenty of times, and I knew it was him. There was another time where I'm driving down the road, and I was on the freeway, and I know it was in San Diego. I was going westbound from El Cajon. I forget where I was going, but I was going westbound on the 8 freeway from El Cajon area, or I was in the El Cajon area. And I'm driving about 80 miles an hour, and it's raining or sprinkling, and it was the first kind of day of that. So you know how the oil starts to lift off the road, and so the roads get a little bit more slick and all that? Well, so I'm driving about 80, and I don't think I was really paying attention to way up in front of me. I don't know, I think I was messing with the radio dial or something. I was doing something where I wasn't paying attention. I was going about 80 miles an hour. And then right as I'm focusing on the radio, I remember I'm looking down, and I think it was at the radio. And I'm looking at the radio, and I hear this tick. You know when a rock hits your windshield and you know that it's a rock hitting your windshield? That's the sound. That was it. It went tick, and I looked up real fast because I was like, whoa, what is that? And right when I looked up, I see everybody slamming on the brakes in front of me. And if I didn't look up right at that time, because I had to slam on my brakes too, I remember it was slick, right? So I didn't have as much traction as I wanted. And the timing of it, because the road was so slick. So it took me a lot longer to slow down. Otherwise, I would have been skidding, which I started to. But if I didn't look up at that time, there was no way I would have been able to stop in time, and I would have smashed right into the rear end of the guy in front of me. Because everybody just put on the brakes fast because an accident or whatever it was. I forget what it was. But I do remember that when that rock hit, or whatever it was, hit the windshield, I looked up from the radio, and then I saw, and I just had just enough time to stop. And there was a little bit of skidding going on, but perfect timing for me not to get in an accident. So I believe God was there too. I believe God used whatever that was, a rock, anything that he wanted to use to make that sound on my windshield to save me. So like he was talking about those things that he saw throughout his life, we have those too. Take note of those. God is speaking to you. God speaks to you, not only to, like those things, like I said, where he saved my life, but he'll speak to you. And those will be markers for where you need to be, or where you need to go, or where you have to turn to stay on the path that he wants you to be on. All these things are items that you can use to know that you're on the right path, or to look back on and go, my faith is now increased because I understand that God was there. God was doing this. God was doing that. So don't discount the things that God tells you, that God shows you, or the things that happen to you, and don't chalk them up as coincidence. If God put it there in your life, then there's a reason. You have a purpose. You have a reason. You have a path. All those things are connected to God's little markers. And then you can always look back and realize God is there. And for that guy, God was there. Even though the last 17 years, he thought he was on his own because he didn't believe in God. Oh, man. So another great show, man. That was awesome. I can't believe God is using ChatGPT to lead people to himself. That's how good God is. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening in. My name is Clint Armitage. This is the Radio Coffee House. And until next time, stay safe, stay blessed. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Radio Coffee House Show, where we're all about Jesus, coffee, and radio. We'll see you next time.